Our next speaker, I'm really excited to say, is David Sable. He's the global CEO of Y&R, all the way from New York City. As an early digital entrepreneur, David continues to be tapped for his marketing and digital expertise around the world. Welcome, David.
How's it, South Africa? Come on, guys, wake up. I need everybody's attention. Here's the deal, right? There's a lot to talk about. I love coming to South Africa. I love coming to Africa in general. I love the energy. I love the motivation. I love the innovation. Can I have the slides, please? I love the innovation. Thank you. And what I hope to do over the course of the next little bit is put that all in some kind of context with what's happening in the rest of the world. Now, I believe that we should be changing the world with digital technology, with technology in general. The problem is we're not. And the reason that we're not is because instead we're focused on monetization, on social, on bite-sized pieces. I mean, you just saw some incredible journalism, and I don't think that she was worried about bite-size. She was worried about giving you this story, and I'm going to talk a lot about that. We talk about e-commerce, and we talk about smartphones as if that's all that exists in the world, and we'll talk more about that later. But here's the deal. I think on the continent, you are changing the world. And there are opportunities for us in the West, in developed countries, to learn more. There's this a great quote from Kenya's largest bank, right? The future is a convergence between banking and telecoms. Unlike any other part of the world, Africa is bringing about this convergence. And by the way, they're bringing about this convergence without smartphones, as you all know better than I do. And even when we talk about smartphones, what I think the biggest joke is, and we have people here from Google today, as we know, Android has the largest proportion or the largest market share in the world of the smartphone market. And yet, every time you see a smartphone in an advertisement, what do you see? iPhones. Why? Because all the art directors have iPhones. So the rest of the world is using Android, but because the art directors all have iPhones, that's what we use. So here's the bottom line, and let me give you this thought because it's incredibly important. Digital is everything, but not everything is digital. This is my mantra. Digital is everything. Today, newspapers come from a digital source. There is little in the world today that doesn't come from a digital source. But the truth of the matter is, we still read newspapers. We still read magazines. And by the way, magazines are still being created, even in the developed world, because there's a use for them. People like them. We still go to restaurants. We still go to movies, live shows. All of a sudden, we've discovered this new thing. Everybody know experiential events? This is a new concept, right? Concerts are now called experiential events. I wish I had known that when I started going to concerts as a kid. I'd be a billionaire today. So digital is everything, but not everything is digital. And this is a critical issue to know. So here's the question, right? How many times have you heard this? Digital first. Digital first, right? We have to be digital first. I hear this all the time. Should we be digital first? How about mobile first? Here on the continent, mobile first, maybe that's a thing. I say they're both wrong. There's only one answer, and that's to be people first. Because I think that if you think first about people, if you think first about humanity, if you think first about this notion that digital is everything, but not everything is digital, thank God we're not digital yet. People first changes the way we look at the world, the way we look at innovation, the way we look at technology. And by the way, when we use the word technology, we use it wrong. Because most of what we talk about is really not technology, in the sense they're not technological developers. What they are applicators, they're applications, apps, right? So we tend to think of apps as those little buttons we press on smartphones. But technological application just means the use of technology in a way that enhances somebody's life or does something interesting for you. So most of what we talk about is not really technological innovation, it's just technological application. So in the next 40 minutes or so, actually 36 minutes and 2 seconds, I'm going to talk about what I consider to be digital game changers, the opportunities I see here in South Africa and maybe the rest of the continent, axioms for a connected world, the things that I think are critical. And then I always love this, if you remember nothing else, the one thing or the few things that I'd like you to take away from what I talk about today. So first, let's talk about digital game changers. This is the problem, right? Like, we somehow think that everything in the world is about Facebook and Twitter. Now, I happen to love Facebook. I happen to love Twitter. I just came from Twitter's headquarters 2 weeks ago. But that's not what it's about. We're losing sight of what the world is about. So here they go, right? Number one, websites are dead. Now, that's a big statement. Websites are still useful, but as a concept, websites are dead. You see, websites came about in a world where the entire experience online was linear. We went from here to here to here to here. We just clicked our way through. And Yahoo became the geniuses of monetizing that because they charged for eyeballs, right? Now, you only had 2 eyeballs, but you got charged for your eyeballs probably 40, 50 times as you clicked through something because that was the only way you could go. The reason websites are dead, because we can go direct today. The whole world is like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, right? You click your heels 3 times and you wish to go someplace and there you are. Google started that. Google gave us the opportunity to do that through search. And today, we just do that naturally. We do it through apps. We do it through Google. We do it through other ways. So today we have the ability not to have to go to some website and start looking, but just to go direct to something that we want. And by the way, that's a best practice because you know that if somebody is looking for something that you sell, if you lead them through search to your website, you're dead. You lost the sale, you lost the engagement, you lost their interest. People want to go direct. They want to go right to the thing that they're looking for. The second digital game changer, one-click shopping. Now, you might think this is silly because I said the problem we have is monetization, but this is critical because it's bigger than just shopping. The implication of one-click shopping is that stickiness is irrelevant, right? So we still talk about that. How many times do I sit in a meeting and I hear people say, well, we've got to make this a sticky issue, right? We've got to keep them stuck there. It's important for us to have a sticky digital experience. Why? Why? Amazon was brilliant, right? Amazon figured out that you only have to be on their site or in their environment for 2 seconds. For a second, who cares? So long as you engage, which in their case is actually buy something, that's all that's important. So stickiness is not important. What's important is that we give people the opportunity to engage with us quickly, intelligently, and in a way that gets them to a conclusion, that brings them to some closure in what it is that they're doing, that they're looking for, they're trying to engage in. Otherwise, we've lost them. So it's about one-click everything. The third and very, very important digital game changer, what I call the conversation prism. Some people call this social. Conversation prism. Why is it important? Because it's really simple, right? It's the water cooler on steroids. Social is nothing more than what used to happen every morning in an office when people would gather around the coffee or around the water cooler and just talk. And they talk about what they saw on television last night or the ball game that they watched or the soccer match, the football match that they were at, or whatever it was. That is what people do. We are inherently social beings. Twitter and Facebook work because human beings are social. Ever since Eve gave Adam the apple, it has been nonstop. So the opportunity here, the implication is you don't understand social. If you think social is a technical issue, if you look at social as technology and you think that there's some big technological implication, you've lost it. It's about the water cooler. It's about sharing. It's about what human beings do. Critical digital game changer. There is only one internet, my friends. We were talking about this before, right? It's what I call mono-webism. So here's the deal, right? You might get your content on a tablet, and you might get it on your smartphone. You might get it on a PC. You might get it on a screen like this. You might see it outdoors on some big digital display. But at the end of the day, it comes from one source. That's it. What happens at the other end is a function of people. Remember I said people first. A function of what people doing, of what people are doing at that moment, where they are, what device they have. But there's only one web. That's it. All that stuff comes to you from one source. It's not coming from 100 different sources. Critical issue to think about. Mobile. I love mobile. I'm going to talk about mobile a lot today. But the biggest implication of mobile is I'm free. And I think sometimes we lose sight of this. Why is this important? Because if you go back, and it's worth Googling, We have somebody from Google here today, so I'm going to say Google a few times. If there were people from Microsoft, I'd say Bing, but no one knows what I was talking about. So Google this and you'll find out that I'm right. If you go back 15 years, if you go back even 10 years, read what the analyst was saying was going to happen in our digital society, right? We were all going to be in front of screens in our basements or wherever in our house, and we'd be in these cocoons, right? And movie theaters would die, restaurants would die, events would die. People were actually saying, what's going to happen with sports events? How are we going to do that? They were thinking about avatars, like how are we going to get all this stuff going? People are not going to go. And yet, along came the phones, or along came smartphones. Actually, what came about was monowebism, was the ability, because it all comes from the same thing. Now I'm out in the streets. Now I'm walking around. Now it's changed my experience. So what's really interesting is that in the beginning, we talked about, right, experiences on the screen. That's what people were worried about. How do I create user interfaces? How do I create these great experiences in the screen? So I heard one of the great Microsoft developers, Microsoft has 5 or 10 people around the world, literally in caves, that they pay zillions of dollars to just to think really smart. And they got one guy in Canada who's their mobile guy, and I had a chance to go and sit with him. And so a bunch of people from Microsoft, he holds up a smartphone. He says, anybody know what this is? Come on. We're not stupid. It's a smartphone. It's okay, great. What's it for? What's it for? It's for experiences. What kind of experiences? Well, mobile experiences. Goes wrong. You missed it. You guys don't understand. This is the mobile genius, right? What he said was, the mistake is to think that you're creating stuff for the screen. Obviously, the user interfaces have to be good and work and yada, yada. He said it's all about what happens in your real life. It's not what happens on the screen that's important. It's what that does for you in your real life. You're walking in the streets. You're sitting in a restaurant. You want to go to you're looking at the wine. Whatever it is, it has to impact your life. I call that digital exponential. So I'm free. That's what mobile is all about. Geolocation. Geolocation is simple. I'm never lost. But there's two sides to this never being lost, right? I'm never lost to you. I'm never lost to me. So in other words, I'm never lost to you. You, as the person who is engaging with me, whether it's a store or whatever, a magazine, BBC, you know where I am. So now that you know where I am, it's up to you to figure out how you make my life better as I walk around. But I'm also never lost, because now I can find your restaurant. I can find that little barbershop. I can find that little store on some side street in some backwoods neighborhood of some town that I've never been to, and make a purchase and engage and have commerce and do something interesting. Now that's critical. And I can tell you that all around the world, there is an explosion of retail at the street level in interesting little neighborhoods because people can now find it, because it's easy to go to. It's an amazement. Tasks. This one I love and might be the most, I keep saying they're all the most important, but I love this one. The implication of tasks is I can do anything, right? So I can use my mobile, my tablet, whatever. There's nothing that I can't do, right? So I can get my finance, I can make a purchase, I can track my sleep. Nothing, anything that can enhance my life, I can do. I can order a taxi. Now, who knows what this is? Quick, somebody. Take a guess. Someone, loud, somebody, yell out, come on. What? No, okay, this is what it is. Good. It's a 3-year-old turning on an iPad. Now, why is that important? Remember this gesture. This is huge. Why is this important? This is important because I posit that this is the first time in the history of the human race that a 3-year-old and an 80-year-old can use the same tool in the same way. Think about that implication. It's beyond. My 3-year-old grandson knows more about iPads than, or as I should say, as much about iPads as his mother does, and his mother is a power user. It's like unbelievable, right? So this is critical. Understanding this gesture is very important. And yet, with all of that, as I said before, we still go to the movies, we still buy stuff. And I love this, right? This is from IKEA. They're just talking now. This was from their last, this was a BBC. Hey, look at that. I didn't even know. People research on their mobile devices, come to the IKEA store, sit on the sofa, then place their order on the device, right? Because it's all converged. It's beautiful. It all comes together, and that's the key. So what's the problem? The problem is what I call digibabble. Remember this word, digibabble. You can all use it. So digibabble is basically where I take anything digital and I give it basically magical powers. I ascribe to it all kinds of power, all kinds of things that really aren't true, but I give huge value to it. And I say, wow, everything is great because it's digital. And you see a lot of this. I write about this all the time. So that is the biggest problem in the world. And the challenge is, I believe, that digibabble actually limits the true innovation and inhibits the true power of digital. Because we keep thinking that everything has to be social or bite-sized or whatever, and we're not thinking about people first, we're thinking about digital first or social first or whatever it is, and we're not thinking about people first, that is digibabble, my friends, and we're losing it. So here are what I think is South Africa's opportunity. I'm going fast because I'd like to have questions if I can. So here's the deal, right? You are mobile first. And I'm saying mobile first because I'm not sure you're people first yet. And this is really going to be interesting for me. So you're innovating for economic development better than just about any place I've seen. Mobile money pioneers, healthcare service on the rise, demand for content. There are interesting ways of accessing it. Now, by the way, you also see this in India. And when I was in India a few months ago, I actually discovered that there were Microsoft developers who were developing programs for feature phones. They didn't even know it back in Redmond. They're just two guys who were doing it, and they had some incredible stuff they were doing around dams and helping farmers be able to control the flow of water to their fields, all through feature phones. It was astounding, astounding. And nobody knew about it back in Redmond. Why? Because they didn't see it as digital smartphone development. And I think that's actually kind of sad. And yet, I guess the problem is, and we hear this, you heard this in the introduction, right? Mobile in Africa delivers connectivity, but somehow it doesn't seem that we've got that consumer connection yet. Now, I find that sort of interesting, given the fact that there's so much use of it. I'd argue if you think people first and not mobile first, there's huge consumer connection. Huge. I wish we had that much consumer connection in terms of the true importance in developed countries. But so I think maybe there's a mindset issue here that we can deal with. So, but here's what I think is the real challenge, right? And I think this gets to the heart of the issue. And I'd argue not just here, because I think in developed countries it's the same thing, right? You are a country of storytellers. This is a continent of storytelling. And yet, where is the storytelling in mobile? We're not going there yet. We're not looking at that yet. And by the way, I can tell you this is an issue in developed countries too. Now, I happen to believe that people, like I said before, social is DNA, storytelling is DNA. But we've lost a bit of that DNA out there. Here you haven't. It's core to who this continent is and who this country is. So here are my axioms for a connected world, right? We talked about digibabble, that's one. Get it out, we have to lose it. But here's some proofs, right? And I think this is important. And this gets to the notion of storytelling and what I hope that you'll avoid here. So Amazon says, well, what's storytelling? Storytelling's not about people. Storytelling's about the algorithm. Because we have the algorithm. We know everything about you. So ergo, if I know everything about you, I can create better stories than anybody else. Like imagine if Shakespeare knew everything about his audience, right? He would have written better. That's what they're saying. The Bible would have been better. The Quran would have been better if they had all known about, had all that data. So Amazon says, we're going to mine all of our data and we are going to kill Hollywood. We're going to disintermediate Hollywood. We're going to have better stories because we're going to know what everybody wants. So guess what happens? They put out a bunch of shows, nobody watches them. Meanwhile, Netflix, House of Cards, Orange is the New Black, people watch those? Yes, no? Hands up if you watch any of them. You like them? Good stuff. People who watch that aren't watching this stuff because it's based on the algorithm. It's not interesting. So what does Amazon do? A few months later, they say, this is a quote, It's amazing to me that they can do this, right? They say one thing, and then 12 months later, something completely different. So the same guy, Roy Price, says, it's not like you can come in on Tuesday and the computer says, doot, doot, doot. Here are the shows you are going to do. You have to use judgment as well. Gee whiz, right? Isn't that great? So that's Amazon, but here's even better. Now go forward 2 months after that, they hire Woody Allen, and they pay tons and tons of money to important people. So again, storytelling, real storytelling, human storytelling, people first, not digital, not mobile, not algorithm, people first, always. All right, who knows? Digital is everything, but not everything is digital. We already established that concept. What do all of these companies have in common? One thing, quick. What do you think? Somebody. Here's what they have in common. You think they're great digital companies, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Nope. What they all have in common is that without a postal service, they don't exist. Every one of those companies could exist without digital. Every single one of them, including eBay, including Amazon, wouldn't be as efficient. And in fact, they did. Amazon used to be called, in America, Sears and Roebuck. All of those companies could exist. Not as efficiently, for sure. Not as good, not as profitable, maybe, although Amazon has yet to make a profit. But without a postal service, they don't exist. There's no business. Hello? Digital is everything. But not everything is digital. So this is one of the great ones, Warby Parker. I don't think Warby Parker, in fact, I know it hasn't come here yet. Warby Parker is a company, it's right now, it's only in the United States. It's worth looking up. Google it or Bing it, because I do have some Microsoft clients, so I want to make sure they know I've said that at least once or twice. So Warby Parker starts its business by saying, we are going to be completely digital. And what's the problem? The problem is that eyeglasses are expensive. We're going to make it simple. So you come online, you pick them, you can see how they look online, and we'll send you 5 pairs. We send you 5 pairs, you pick the 1 or 2 you like, you send it back to us, we put the lenses in, it's great. Now here's the thing, right? You don't have to be a genius to figure out that that business model is broken. Because if they really do get lots of people, think about the inventory they have to keep. Think about the breakage, it's unbelievable, right? And yet, the Digibabble took in, right? All the analysts go, whoa, unbelievable, they're disintermediating all the stores, right? That's it, they're finished. Retail for eyeglasses is dead. It's all going to be online, Warby Parker. 6 months later, Warby Parker starts opening stores. Not just stores, they're opening them in the hippest neighborhoods all over the United States. Here's the great quote. Why? He's talking about his first stores. He goes, so the reason he said it is because they ran out of inventory. Duh. Like, you don't need an MBA to figure out that was going to happen. So he goes, it showed us, so he said that people came to their house, right, and they tried on glasses. So he said it showed us that we could create, listen carefully, really special experience with individuals when we met them in person. Digital is everything, my friends, and everything is digital. It blows my mind that people say this, and the analyst is still saying, no, it's a digital business. Come on, give me a break. Now, catalogs, by the way, are making a big comeback in the US. Now, why is that? One of the reasons is because even Amazon is using the mail. Even Amazon is shipping and mailing stuff, pictures of things that they sell, because people do relate to it. People do relate to it, and people like catalogs, because catalogs are great. And when you interview people, right, and you do focus groups or intervention or whatever, and you talk to people about catalogs, they say, well, it's still easier to take a catalog to the bathroom than it is to take your iPad. So it's easier to look and see what it is you want to buy, I guess. So catalogs are becoming more and more interesting again. So I love this one. We don't call it a catalog, we call it a journal. It's more to inspire and engage. Okay, call it what you want. It's still a printed thing that you're sending to somebody in the mail. It doesn't take away from digital, by the way. It just enhances the digital. So I'd argue that you need to think differently about functional content. So, this is kind of a coupon insert standard kind of thing that happens here in South Africa, but also in the US. But if you take a look at what companies like Anthropology are doing, much more lifestyle, much more engaging, much more drive to digital. And by the way, the smartest people are figuring out how to balance the two. How do I balance digital and print, right? So stuff you can only buy online, stuff you can only see in the catalog, stuff you can only buy in the store. Wow, isn't that a concept? Triangulate, get people to have to use all three, and all of a sudden you've created a great engagement. We have a concept that we call Generation World. I think this is really, really important. I think it's important for Africa as well. So we've done surveys around the world. We've done across developed and developing countries, right? And what we found is that today's generation is different, right? We have a generation of consumers who are not defining themselves by age or demographic or country or anything. In fact, what we find, they behave around things that they do, they embrace conflict, and they like complexity. Now, I argue that more and more as we go forward, we're going to see Generation World as an incredibly important force in the world, particularly in the digital world. So this is the study, right? Brazil, China, US, ages 18 to 64. Listen to this. 57% as interested in foreign culture as much as their own. So in other words, they're not limiting themselves, right? 60% are mobile, but listen to how they say mobile. Remember what I said, mobile is I'm free? People should be free to live, work, and marry however we want. That's how they view mobility. So we look at mobility and say, oh my God, it's a smartphone. They're saying mobility is I'm free, is what I was talking about before. 55% are ageless. Age doesn't define them. They're not interested in age. And if you saw recently, I thought it was great. You can see it in some of the fashion magazines and some of the business magazines. Celine is doing a new fashion campaign. Just take a look at the icon. I won't say anything more, but you'll get my point. 60% feel empowerment. This is amazing. 60% are empowered. They say, life is up to me, right? It's up to me to do what I want. And 53% are still evolving. 60-year-olds, like myself, still say they have evolving personalities, right? They don't want to be locked in. They don't want to say they do any one thing. That's Generation World. And this is great. This is from BBC Radio. I love this. And we have the same study in the US. If you look at the list of the 1,000 favorite artists for 60-year-olds and the 1,000 favorite artists for 13-year-olds, there is a 40% overlap. Think about that. 40% overlap. Now, you could be really cynical and say that's because music sucks today, and so everybody's listening to the great music that I listened to when I was younger. But I don't think that's true. I just think it's because great music is great music. 40% overlap, and I'd argue that it gets bigger, and we see the same in brands as well. So all of a sudden, this convergence of age that relates to social, it relates to things that are happening in the real world, it relates to culture, it relates to business, it relates to what I buy, to politics, becomes more and more important. And this one I love, the Brooklyn Beard, right? Goes mainstream all around the world. I love it. So again, this notion of Generation World becomes more and more important. So here's the bottom line of this. I believe that we need to change the language a little bit. This is my language, so for what it's worth, it's me and my company and the people who I work with who use this language, but I find it to be very empowering. If you think about creativity as being the story, see, we sometimes mix up the notion of creativity and innovation. So I'm saying, think about creativity as the story, right? Creativity is creating the story. Innovation is how we share the story. Innovation is how we share the story. So in Shakespeare's time, innovation was the Globe Theater. In Arthur Conan Doyle's time, innovation was the Strand magazine. In our time, innovation could be Facebook, it could be Twitter, it could be a lot of things. But creativity is the story, innovation is how we share it. Technology is the enabler. That's all it is. Technology only enables. It does nothing more than enabling. In and of itself, technology is just cold. It's neither good nor bad. It's neither fast nor slow. It just is. And it's how you use it that's important. But the ideal is taking action. That's what we need to think about. So this, by the way, is the line waiting for, in New York, just 8 months ago, waiting for the new iPhone 6, right? So the ideal is taking action. So I love this picture because at the end of the day, with all that we talk about, digital and it's Apple and yada, 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 they're standing outside to get the phone. They want to go inside, buy it, try it, look at it. They don't want to get it in the mail. They want to see it. They want to try it. They want to talk to somebody live. and buy it. And then I can make that engagement much easier with Square and all kinds of other things. But the ideal is taking action. So always think about, how do I take my story, use innovation, use all of this that I have today to make it more interesting as I get it out. How do I use technology to enable that story to do something, but understanding the entire time is that I want people to do something. I don't want them just sitting there. I want them doing something. So here's the if you remember nothing else, and it leaves us a few minutes for questions. Humanity over algorithm. Look for people first. Algorithms are great. I've spent my life in data. I spent my life in the data business, using data, using interesting ways of understanding what people do, but it's always humanity. Storytelling trumps. In our business, storytelling is still the key. And if you don't believe me, just look at what's happening with Amazon, right? I showed you that the algorithm is dead, right? It doesn't work when they try to make content, because storytelling is what's important. People want stories. They want to connect to your brands. They want to connect to the things. They even want to connect to your restaurants. I did a little project for a friend of mine who owns a restaurant, and I'm always interested when I go into a restaurant, and I'm not that good at wine selection. I always pick the wrong wine. So I always ask the sommelier, like I say, all right, here's the wine, here's maybe the price points, but I want a wine with a story. Give me a story. I want to understand the where it comes from. Most of the time I think the guys make it up. It grows on the left side of the mountain and the sun comes from that. But it doesn't matter. It always makes me feel good, right? So a friend of mine opened a restaurant, and I did his wine list. And I said, let's put the stories in the thing. He said, but nobody does. I said, just do it, trust me. His wine sales went up about 80%, because there was a little story next to every single wine that he had. And people were reading it and saying, wow, this is really cool. And I didn't make them up. We got them from somebody else who made them up. Content, connection, conversion. These are really important things, the 3 C's, right? Content, connection, convergence, right? Because that's what it is. Content is critical. How we connect with that content, but understanding that it's all converged already anyways. The world is converged. All these devices are converged. It's irrelevant. We talk about TV versus something else. It's all, who cares? It's a stupid debate. It's a worthless debate. Because what's important is the content that you're watching, and then how do I use that content to connect? Generation world I talked about, and word of mouth is alive and well. So I love, this is another new concept of the digital world, word of mouth. This never existed before. This has always been the single most important aspect of advertising, has been word of mouth, because it's great to do a good commercial, but the truth is, if people didn't talk about the product and the commercial and what you were doing, it was always irrelevant. So this is the final thought, and I think this is important for the continent. Steve Jobs was a low-tech parent. All this content's going to be available to all of you, by the way. Steve Jobs was a low-tech parent. Steve Jobs didn't allow his children to touch his devices because he wanted them to think. He wanted them to experience the world. He wanted them to understand that, yes, those are great, but they're enablers. They only enable you. They don't create in and of themselves. And I love that. I love that notion. I think it's the most important thing I've ever heard. Now, by the way, you can look this up too. There's something called the Waldorf schools, W-A-L-D-O-R-F in the US. They don't allow anybody to have computers. You're not allowed to have them in class. They have parents sign documents that they don't let them have them at home either. So here's the greatest thing, right? So you'd think that these are all Luddites. These are all probably, Mennonites or Amish people living out, in the country someplace who are sending their kids. Turns out the #1 Waldorf school in the United States is in Silicon Valley, and who goes there? The elite of Google, the elite of Facebook. Like, those are the people who go. So they asked one of the Google dads, like, why do you send your kid here? He said, it's easy, because computers, we're making it so simple. He'll learn to use a computer, and yeah, of course he's going to see it at home, but I want him to think. So here's my movie scenario. This is my movie scenario, right? So Google sends all their kids to this school. The rest of us think that it's all about computer education and smart screens and whatever. Google turns off all the power in the world, kills all the computers, and the only people left who know how to do anything are the children of Google executives, and they rule everything. So there you go. So, my friends, this is my final message I want to leave with. Let's change the world. Let's stop talking only about monetization. Let's stop talking about iPhone 6. They're all great things. Yes, they're all important. But we have the opportunity, I think, for the first time in our history to change the world. And instead, we have ISIS creating videos of beheadings. We have people doing all kinds of things online that are just terrible. Let's change the world. And I think you here in Africa are at the center of it and have the opportunity to inspire the rest of us, to teach the rest of us. And that's what I hope comes of all of this. So I thank you very much. You can follow me on the Weekly Ramble, the Huffington Post, on LinkedIn Influencers. I write about a lot of this stuff and others. I also answer all my emails. You're all welcome to be in touch with me, and I do my best to answer everyone. And I thank you again. So, questions? We have 4 minutes and 45 seconds. So I love taking questions. Yes, speak up, stand up, speak clearly, and tell me who you are.
Interested in how you would apply that people-first principle to media businesses.
So I think, so interesting. How do you apply that to the media business, people first? So I think by definition it's implied, because media doesn't work unless it goes to people. I spent the early part of my life doing media. I started as a copywriter, I went to the media side of the business. Media is all about what people are watching, what they're doing, what they're seeing, right? So one of the problems with programmatic today, and we always did programmatic buying. We just didn't know it was called programmatic buying, and we didn't have algorithms. And even when we had algorithms, they were simple, and we did them on spreadsheets. So if you're not thinking about the people you're trying to reach and what they're doing and what they're watching and what they're seeing, you're never going to reach them. All you're going to do is buy a lot of tonnage. If you really want to influence people, you have to think about how do you use that media? How do you use that buy in a way that makes the most sense? Now, I think in this world, it's hugely, the opportunities are huge. You buy cross-platform, you create offline events, you do all kinds, and things that the media companies are doing really, really well. And things that I think we always did, we lost it someplace, and now it's all coming back again. So I think media, to me, is always people first. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and also news media in particular, as in the producers of media owners.
Okay, so media owners, again, news media in particular, so news media is troubling. I mean, you heard some of that today. So we have citizen journalists. I think the good news is every time something real happens in the world, which sadly is usually something bad, we see a spike in return to real sources. So whether it's BBC or CNN or whoever, there's always a spike. So, Malaysian Air goes down, huge spike to CNN all around the world. Huge. Because people want to know that sources are trusted when they're when things are going wrong. During the week, they don't really care. Like, they'll listen to, whatever crap comes through some feed someplace or another, and they won't really bother to check it as much. So I think that it's up to the media owners to figure out, and so you heard that BBC is doing it, right? So they're checking sources, they're trying to figure out how to work with these. And they've always been citizen journalists, by the way. So for example, if you go back, if you know about the Titanic, the news of the Titanic, everybody know this, the news of the Titanic was actually broken by a guy who was a shortwave radio guy doing, who did Morse code, who sat off the coast, north end coast of the US someplace, who was the first person to pick up the radio transmission. Citizen journalist, I don't think he was the first, but the one that I use all the time as an example as being the most famous. He broke that news. So that's always been there. Now it's bigger because we have more efficient ways of gathering it. So I just think that the media guys have to figure that out. But that is people first, though. I think by definition, that's people first. Does that answer the question? We have time for one more.
Who develop new technology, especially in places like Africa and India and BRIC, where the digital divide is big. When you have these conglomerates who've got these walled gardens, the Facebooks and the Googles who come in and give kind of like free access, but to the white list of their preferred suppliers, how do we prevent that from kind of dominating the worldview that we have in Africa?
Okay, so I think it's time's up. So here's the deal. So 2 seconds. So here's the deal, right? I think you're right. So first of all, it's not technology because they're not creating technology; they're creating use of technology. Now, if you go to Silicon Valley today, one of the biggest problems in the valley is that a good part, maybe 80% of everything that's being developed is being developed around the ecosystem of Twitter, Facebook, Amazon, Google, whatever, and people aren't thinking out of the box. And there are places where people are thinking out of the box. Israel, for example, startup nation, huge amount of new technological ways, for example. Interesting things coming out that aren't related to those ecosystems. Disruption, if you will, I hate the word, but disruption of those big guys and the things that they're doing is actually quite easy if you have something that adds value in a way that they don't. And so I'm less concerned about that, because I think that if something is really cool and interesting, it'll come out. Now again, I think the notion of payments here is huge. Huge. I think the problem is that you're not pushing it enough from the continent, and we're not focused on it enough from the West, but we will be. Because you're so far ahead of us in how that economy works. I mean, think about all these places. Think about they have this huge terrorist thing going on in the U.S. today, right? They're trying to get to the root cause of terrorism. So they're arguing poverty is one, although if you listen to the mayor of Amsterdam, he says that's not true. He himself came from Morocco and was poor, and he says, look, I didn't become a terrorist. However, in this case, think about what happens if we put in alternate payment schemes. We allow people to get payments on, even on feature phones, so that they don't have to worry about getting robbed on the way back, that they know that they can go to the store and have a secure transaction. This is huge, even in America, even in Britain, even in France. And so I think that we haven't pushed these things enough. So I think that if you have real applications here, real breakthroughs, that stuff will come through. And I don't think that the Googles, I don't think it has anything to do with them, frankly. So does that answer your question? Good. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much. I appreciate it. And have a great day.
Thank you, David. That was really inspiring stuff.